55 million people lost power because of a single silent software bug, not a lack of electricity. On Thursday, August 14, 2003, just after 4:10 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, the Northeast blackout of 2003 began, plunging a massive portion of North America into complete darkness. This was not a slow decline, but an instantaneous collapse that left millions of citizens stranded in offices, elevators, and trains. You are about to discover how a routine physical event on a hot summer afternoon turned into an invisible trap that human operators could not see. You will also see how this digital blindness reached far beyond darkened light bulbs, quietly disabling water systems and shutting down air travel across the entire region. We are trained to look at massive infrastructure failures as physical breakdowns, but the truth is far more unsettling. The physical grid was perfectly capable of delivering power. It was our ability to see and manage that power that completely vanished in an instant. You would think that when a massive power grid collapses on a hot summer afternoon, the physical lines simply could not handle the sheer volume of electricity. It seems logical. On this particular Thursday, temperatures above 88 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 31 degrees Celsius, drove up energy demand for fans and air conditioning. This heavy electrical load naturally heated the physical power lines, causing them to sag. In a standard physical explanation, this is where the story ends. The weather was too hot, the demand was too high, and the physical wires gave out under the strain. But this physical explanation is a comforting myth. The transmission grid is specifically designed to handle hot summer days and sagging lines. Physical systems have built-in tolerances for these exact environmental demands. The real vulnerability was not a lack of physical capacity, but a profound informational blindness that left operators completely in the dark. The collapse actually began in the quiet of a control room. A software bug in the alarm system at FirstEnergy's control room silently disabled the critical alerts that operators relied on. This software bug did not cause a dramatic crash or a loud alarm. Instead, it did something far worse. It stayed completely silent. Because of this silent software bug, the operators had no idea that overloaded lines had already dropped in voltage. They were looking at screens that showed everything was perfectly normal, even as the physical world outside was beginning to fail. Without these automated alarms, the human operators could not realize they needed to redistribute the power load. They were operating a massive, high-voltage machine completely blind. It was this lack of critical information, rather than a lack of physical power, that set the stage for a historic disaster. As the silent software bug continued to blind the operators, the physical consequences began to cascade across state lines. Because the operators could not see the localized voltage drops, they could not take the routine actions required to balance the system. The overloaded power lines, heated by the high ambient temperatures above 88 degrees Fahrenheit, 31 degrees Celsius, and the heavy current, continued to sag closer and closer to the ground. When these sagging lines made contact with trees, they shorted out. Under normal conditions, operators would have seen this localized failure instantly and rerouted the power to prevent a wider collapse. But on this afternoon, there were no alerts. The informational blindness transformed a series of routine, localized events into an unstoppable, compounding physical crisis that began to rip through the entire interconnected transmission grid of the Northeast. The tipping point arrived with absolute physical violence. At exactly 4:39 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, a massive 3,500 megawatt power surge directed towards Ontario affected the transmission grid. This immense surge of energy tore through the system like a physical wave. The sudden, uncontrolled movement of electricity triggered automatic safety systems across the region. During the blackout, the power load managed by the New York Independent System Operator dropped by 80%, falling precipitously from 28,700 megawatts to just 5,716 megawatts. This was not a gradual shutdown. It was a violent, automated decoupling. The grid was trying to save itself from a massive imbalance that no human was actively managing, because the humans in the control room still did not know that a crisis was unfolding right in front of them. But let us reframe the entire event to understand what actually occurred. We often look at the shutdown of power plants as a sign of physical failure, as if the machinery itself broke under the pressure. The reality is the exact opposite. During the course of the outage, more than 508 generating units at 265 power plants shut down. These plants did not blow up, and they did not run out of fuel. They shut down because they were programmed to protect themselves when the grid around them became unstable. The physical infrastructure worked exactly as it was designed to work. The true disaster was that we had built a system so complex that human beings could not manage it without a software interpreter. When that interpreter failed due to a single software bug, the entire system became unmanageable, proving that our greatest vulnerability is informational, not physical. This informational blindness immediately translated into physical paralysis for millions of people. All airports in the affected area were closed immediately during the blackout. This sudden closure led to diverted incoming flights and zero departures, freezing air travel across a massive corridor. On the ground, the situation was equally severe. The outage disrupted most Amtrak Northeast Corridor service and electrified commuter railways. These trains could not run because they depended entirely on electricity for their signaling and crossing systems. Without power, the safety systems defaulted to a stop state. Thousands of commuters were suddenly stranded on platforms and in dark tunnels. The transport systems did not fail because the tracks were broken or the trains were damaged. They stopped because the invisible flow of data and power that coordinated them had vanished in an instant. The consequences of this system-wide blindness extended far beyond stranded commuters and dark airports. It reached deep into the basic survival infrastructure of our cities. Water systems in several cities lost pressure during the blackout. Because these municipal water systems relied on electric pumps to maintain pressure and keep contaminants out, the sudden loss of electricity compromised the safety of the entire water supply. This loss of pressure required boil water advisories to be put into effect for millions of residents. A simple software bug in a power company's control room had successfully compromised the drinking water of major metropolitan areas. This reveals how tightly coupled our critical systems have become, and how a failure of information in one sector can instantly degrade the physical safety of another. As the afternoon wore on, the streets of major cities filled with millions of stranded people trying to make their way home. To understand the sheer scale of this human migration, researchers turned to unique methods of observation. The scientific analysis of photographs and video images can be used to estimate attendance at large, peaceful gatherings. By performing physical head counts or analyzing density within similar areas, scientists could study the patterns of these massive crowds of stranded citizens. This scientific tool allowed researchers to measure the human impact of the outage in real time. It showed a society suddenly forced onto the streets, moving in massive, silent groups through cities that had lost their modern lifelines. These crowds were a direct physical manifestation of a digital blind spot that had occurred hours earlier in a quiet control room. Every piece of evidence from this historic event points to a singular, undeniable conclusion. We are accustomed to blaming our infrastructure failures on extreme environmental demands, like summer heat waves or high power usage. But the 2003 Northeast blackout reveals that our greatest vulnerability is not our physical capacity, but our informational blindness. The grid did not collapse because we ran out of power. It collapsed because a single software alarm bug prevented human operators from seeing and managing a routine localized voltage drop. The physical lines sagged. The temperature climbed above 88 degrees Fahrenheit, and the plants shut down. But these were all logical physical reactions to an unmanaged system. The true breakdown was the loss of visibility. When we lose the ability to see our systems, we lose the ability to control them. In our rush to build larger and more complex networks, we must realize that physical size is meaningless without informational clarity. The moment we cannot see the state of our infrastructure is the moment we lose control of it. The physical grid did not run out of power. It simply ran out of visibility. If the hidden systems that keep our modern world running fascinate you, the story of how our transcontinental communication lines are secured is next. So subscribe to catch it.